bacteria show radical changes in the lab. Is it finally proof of evolution? Stick around, we're going to examine it. This is Genesis Week.
My teacher told me I could be whatever I want when I grow up, so I became a masochist.
A recent paper in Cell magazine documents alleged evolution in bacteria. Xavier et al. Grew multiple generations of bacteria in the lab and documented some rather radical changes. Now, the bacteria have been given the big long Latin name, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, and that's a serious mouthful.
Something tells me you're quite used to mouthfuls, Mr. Juby.
And I doubt that very many of our viewers speak Latin, so we're just going to call them PA bacteria for short.
Usually on his show, Ian Juby will use his segment to do 3 or 4 different stories, but for some reason he decided to stretch out this one story about PA bacteria into his entire episode. So I'm going to do my best to edit it down so he doesn't just drone on forever, because it's so fucking boring.
These bacteria have that famous flagellum. The flagellum is like a mini inboard-outboard motor. It's a tail that the bacteria literally spins. And because of the structure of the tail, it takes on a corkscrew shape. Spinning this corkscrew propels the bacteria forward. Now, there are many bacteria that have a form of flagella, and they can spin them blazingly fast, up to 100,000 RPM, which can propel the bacteria at up to 15 body lengths per second.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just not used to you talking about real science.
These astonishingly complex biological nanomachines outstrip the best technology our best minds on planet Earth can produce.
I mean, that's interesting, but it's really off topic from what we're talking about here.
The Japanese in particular have spent an incredible amount of time and money investigating these nanomachines in hopes of being able to perhaps develop nanotechnology based upon these incredible biological machines. Yet our best nanotechnologies we can produce are gigantic by comparison, crude, inefficient, and unreliable.
I kind of feel like you're trying to make a point here, but I'm just going to let you ramble on until you actually get to it.
These PA bacteria move around using this tail, and by laying down a film of surfactant. These bacteria lay down a layer of this slippery film and then use it as a highway of sorts for the other bacteria. Now, using their tails, they can move along this new surfactant highway at great speed. Scientists call this swarming. However, to stay in one place where there is food and to somewhat protect themselves, the bacteria need to do the opposite. The bacteria need to lay down a sort of sticky film that they can anchor to. Now, this is called biofilm, and you can think of it as something like glue. Now, to make either of these substances requires energy from the bacteria. It takes work. So the Xavier team put some bacteria in a petri dish and let it grow. They filmed this growth over a day or so, and you can see the surfactant highways the bacteria are building. They then took that bacteria, generation 1, put it in a test tube, taking some of that generation 1 and putting a drop of it in another petri dish. They let it grow another generation. They then removed it and put generation 2 in another test tube, putting a drop of that generation into another petri dish, and so on. Several generations later, the growth pattern changed dramatically. The bacteria no longer made highways, so to speak, but rather they uniformly covered a larger surface area in a faster time. The researchers called it hyperswarming.
Right, so what we're supposed to take from this is that after generations of these bacteria being in an artificially created environment, that they adapted to better suit that environment.
The researchers then took a closer look at the bacteria itself. And normally these bacteria only have one flagellar tail. But after several generations of unhindered growth in petri dishes, the bacteria now had several flagella. These later generations were able to outrun the original generations, enabling the later generations to get to the food and consume it faster. So obviously, in a competition, the younger, multi-tailed generation would rapidly outnumber the older, single-tailed generation.
Correct, in this new environment in which they've adapted to live more efficiently.
Now surely this is the finest example of evolution witnessed, is it not?
Yeah, it's a good one.
I mean, it happened right there, in the lab in front of everybody. They even got it on film. Well, one would hope that would be a simple answer. But it is not a simple yes or no answer, because it depends on your definition of evolution.
What the There is but one definition of evolution. It doesn't matter what your definition is. There is one definition that is accepted.
It is easier to grab surfactant-covered jello than it is to get a solid definition on what evolution is.
Evolution literally means the gradual development or change of something.
Frankly, I think this is a deliberate obfuscation by anti-theists who use very weak definitions of evolution, like change over time.
Oh my fuck. So you propose that different scientific fields that study different forms of evolution have an anti-theistic mandate? You are fucking crazy.
Well, using such weak definitions, these bacterial changes would be an example of, quote, evolution, end quote.
Oh god, would you just get to the point here? Tell me what is the real definition of evolution then. I can't wait to hear what somebody who doesn't believe in evolution thinks the real definition of evolution should be.
But then again, so would the evolution of the bicycle. And neither have anything to do with the evolution that you and I are taught in school.
Okay, the evolution of the bicycle and the evolution of organisms is different, you fucking idiot. Because the evolution of organisms is through a very specific process, and the evolution of the bicycle is a process of design. Okay, let's just go down a different road here. It's erroneous, yes, to compare the evolution of bicycles to the evolution of organisms. But you're wrong that the evolution of these organisms in the petri dish have nothing to do with the evolution of organisms out in the wild. It is exactly the same thing. And I am getting sick and fucking tired of people comparing the evolution of organisms to the evolution of non-organic things. Yes, they can both evolve, but when we say evolution of organisms, we're talking about a very specific process. Context is everything.
Now, what we are taught in school is the molecules to man evolutionism. And by that definition, then no, these changes in the bacteria are not evolution.
Okay, what school did you go to? No school teaches that molecules inherently evolve into man. That is not what evolution is. Are you proposing that all organisms are trying to evolve into man? What the fuck?
This alleged bacterial evolution really is no different than other examples of alleged evolution seen in bacteria. Now, while it may not seem like it at first, this is really no different than the diversity you see in dogs. Dogs have the ability to give rise to radically different shapes, sizes, colors, hair types, etc. And they are still dogs.
Yes, but that's still evolution. Granted, there's no natural selection in this process, but it's still evolution.
In the present study, the bacteria have evolved into bacteria. In fact, PA bacteria have evolved into PA bacteria.
But you admitted it. They evolved. You admitted it. The fucking idiot admitted it. He admitted it. He admitted it. They evolved. They evolved. He admitted it. They evolved.
So why do I say this is no different than the variation in dogs? Because, like the changes in the dogs, the changes seen in the bacteria are well within its capabilities.
Okay, Mr. Scientist Man, please tell me what you mean.
See, bacteria are very different than you and I. They are single-celled. They can actually change their own DNA.
Okay, and that's not evolution because...
And this present study is just another interesting example of their incredible capabilities and has nothing to do with bacteria evolving into people, which is precisely what is promulgated in our schools as fact and called evolution.
Oh my fucking god, there is so much wrong with what you just said, I don't even know where to begin. First of all, nobody proposes that people evolved from bacteria. That is fucking ridiculous. And second of all, nobody proposes that all bacteria will eventually try to evolve into people. You have such a weak grasp on what biological evolution is. I'm surprised that you even try to teach against it instead of trying to learn more about it.
You'll notice that the first thing Xavier and team went looking for was why this rapid change had never been seen before. Why was this variant of PA bacteria not found out in the wild? Well, the reasons became evident when putting these new and improved bacteria in more normal conditions to compete with the original bacteria. It turns out these new bacteria were lousy at making biofilm, that glue that they need for protection and to stay in one place to survive. So in a favorable laboratory environment which protects the bacteria will actually alter the DNA and produce multiple flagellar tails in order to get to the food quicker. But they do this at a cost. This new system is more demanding on the bacteria, which can only process so much energy. So the bacteria has to make and use this new system at a cost. The cost is in the production of the biofilm, the glue that enables it to stay in one place and be protected. So in the real world, in the wild, so to speak, you do not see this new and improved bacteria because it's not new and improved, it's dead. Because in the real world, it cannot survive compared to the regular wild type.
Your problem is that because it evolved to better suit its new environment and not better suit its old environment, that it's not evolution. Well, I'm sorry, but that is exactly why most organisms evolve. They evolve to better suit new environments, new situations, new climates. Paleontologists will tell you that there's very little deviation from original form when environments do not change. If something is perfectly suited to survive in the environment that it is currently in, it will not change, because changing will be a detriment. But if the environment around it changes, or if it's forced to change its environment, it will survive if it changes, and it will die if it doesn't. Even fucking Darwin knew this shit, and the guy fucking died like 100 years ago.
Now, if you took these new and improved multi-tailed bacteria produced in a lab and released them into the wild, you would see the exact reversal of this alleged evolution in less time than it took those bacteria to change into the multi-tailed form. You would witness them rapidly change back to the single-tailed form that makes the normal surfactant highways. In fact, Xavier and his team performed a test on the different types in a biofilm-producing contest, and the original single-tailed generation won the battle of survival, with the hyperswarmers, shown in green in this picture, pretty much becoming extinct. So how, then, is the rise of these hyperswarmers evolution, if the only place they survive is in very controlled laboratory environments? Well, in a nutshell, it isn't evolution.
Yes, it is. That is exactly what evolution is. You have not created a new problem in which we have never thought of before. This is exactly the kind of scenario that we work out every day in evolutionary fields. This is just how evolution works.
Furthermore, these hyperswarming bacteria, in producing multiple tails, have not produced any new information. They are simply turning on a switch in their DNA, which allows them to make more copies of the same information that they already had. They already had the construction plans on how to build the tail. They've already got a tail. But, as I previously mentioned, there is a price to pay to have these multiple tails.
You spew out bullshit so fast it's hard to keep up. No wonder people believe you. They just don't have the time to pick out every single thing that you've said that's erroneous. Well, luckily for me, I'm a nerd and I've got tons of time. So guess what? I'm gonna do that for you. DNA isn't information in the way that you are proposing here. Yes, there are a series of markers and those markers are read by the organism, but not the same way that a computer program is read by a computer. These PA bacteria have a marker in their DNA that tells them when to stop growing their tail. This marker, through a mutation, stopped working or was erased. Eventually, they started growing more tails. Bacteria that grew extra tails were able to swim faster, and when they reproduced, their offspring too shared that trait. Then when they were introduced back to their old environment, the bacteria with extra tails died off and did not reproduce. But those bacteria who, again through a mutation, had a marker that was reactivated that told their bodies when to stop growing tails started working again, grew less tails, and again, their offspring too shared that trait. Now, the speed in which it happened is irrelevant, but just because it only marks one change in an organism doesn't mean that it's not evolution. Biological evolution can be a very slow process, but we've seen this process speed up in archaeology, and this is actually a really good study on how and why that process can be sped up. This is not a study on whether or not it happens. It's a study on why it happens, how it happens, and how quickly it happens, and why it changes speeds over time. You are not disproving evolution here. You are simply proving that you have a weak, if not non-existent grasp on what evolution is.
Recently, we received an email asking us about nylonase and citrase in bacteria. which are both remarkably similar cases to what Xavier and team saw in their experiments. So let us review the matter in Crevo Rant number 80 from a couple years ago to bring you up to speed on those specific examples of alleged bacterial evolution.
For those of you who complained about the music that I chose for my movie review, you ain't seen nothing yet.
So I had a lot of viewers write in saying that they believed that nylonase was an increase in information in the genome in a bacteria. Well, first of all, let's explain what nylonase is. So there's this bacteria, see? And it lives in the wastewater of this factory, see? And there's a whole pile of nylon in the wastewater from this factory. Now, after a while, this bacteria undergoes a genetic change that allows it to digest nylon. This change is referred to as nylonase. Now, it's fascinating to be sure, but is it evolution in action?
Yep.
No. Now, I've been referring to mistakes in the DNA as mutations. Now, unfortunately, the word mutation has actually meant just a change in the DNA, whether it's engineered by the organism or not. So, in the case of this rant and in all my other rants, I will be referring to accidental changes as mutations and deliberate changes, i.e. the bacteria re-engineers its DNA, as a change, not a mutation.
Whoa, 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 whoa. How can you tell if a change is deliberate or if it's unintentional? That doesn't make any sense. And besides, who makes the choice to change? Nobody chooses to change. Bacteria can't choose to change. Organisms can't choose to change. They're all unintentional changes. That's not how evolution works. You don't just choose to change, for fuck's sakes. You do this all the time. You introduce premises and then you don't define these premises or prove that they're even true.
We also got to clarify, because you see there's a huge difference between new information and borrowed information. Now, if you watched rant number 35, you know that I got 2 copies of my phone book, so I can provide this demonstration.
Wow, it must be really exhausting for creationists who know that DNA changes to try to apologize for creationism in a way that both allows for DNA to change but not change at the same time.
Now, I'm good friends with Xena, the warrior princess. I call her a lot on the telephone. I also call my good friend Captain Antagonator on the telephone a lot. Now, Xena is listed in the X section of the phone book, while Captain Antagonator is listed on the A section. So for convenience, because I call them both a lot, I rip up page X and place it up with page A. This is convenient for me most of the time because now I can look up A and X at the same time. However, it is a detrimental change to the telephone book because the alphabetical sequence is no longer there. It is also an example of borrowed information, not new information. Even if I rip out a page from another phone book and place it in this phone book, it is still an example of borrowed information, not new information.
Well, I'm lost.
And so it is with the nylonase bacteria. It didn't actually produce any new parts, it used pre-existing parts and it modified them. It did this as a trade-off, as an expense to other systems in the bacteria. It took from those systems in order to modify the present pre-existing systems, in order to modify them to give them the ability to digest nylon. This was not new information.
What are you talking about? Of course it's new information. Where do you think they got the trait from? They didn't have the trait before. And yes, they used the same body parts to do it, but because they weren't able to do it before meant that it's new and... Where are they borrowing the information from? You're implying that the information existed already and that they're just activating it, but there's no sign of that. And tell us about the DNA information. You don't even know what you're talking about. You're just talking out of your ass right now.
And if you put these bacteria back into a normal environment, they go back to the way they were, unable to digest nylon. That's because they borrowed information from other systems within the bacteria.
What are you talking? Are you saying that because their body parts can only do one thing at a time, or that they can only digest one type of food at a time, that means that it's not new information?
It also appears that these bacteria did this deliberately.
How the fuck could you possibly know that? Did the bacteria tell you that they changed intentionally? Oh.
See, bacteria can swap DNA just by merely touching each other.
Yes, because they have a trait that allows them to share beneficial changes. That doesn't mean they did it intentionally. Who made the original change? Oh.
The bacteria can also apparently re-engineer their own DNA. In other words, bacteria were designed to re-engineer their own DNA.
Citation, please.
Programmers do this regularly. They design their programs with the ability to reprogram itself. They call this metaprogramming. It takes incredible intelligence and incredible design.
Okay, so your evidence is that it was designed because people can design similar things, even though earlier in this exact same video you implied that bacteria was designed because people can't design similar things. Make up your fucking mind!
So now, why would bacteria be designed with the ability to re-engineer their own DNA?
Let me stop you right there, Juby, because everything you say after this point is based on an assertion and a premise that has not been proven.
Christian wrote in, as for my question, maybe it's been asked before, I don't know. The dinosaurs and man lived at the time of Noah, so why can't we find human skeletons or living artifacts fossilized from the Great Flood along with the dinosaurs? The entire human population was also buried, no? Thank you again and God bless. P.S. Go Habs go!
Perfect. Finally, somebody asks you a real hard question. I can't wait to hear your real hard answer.
Your excellent question, and related to a question I get all the time, that of where are all the human fossils? Well, the reality is that there are lots of human fossils, and yes, even some found with dinosaur bones. You just never hear about them. The Ashley phosphate beds of South Carolina are a huge formation which actually may have extensions in multiple states and possibly even Canada. As the late geologist John Watson pointed out, these phosphate beds were extensively studied in the 1800s, before the advent of evolutionism.
I studied the Ashley phosphate beds for 4 days straight in preparation for this, so I am ready to kick some ass.
And were probably composed of primarily the bones of animals and humans. The evolutionary camp has adamantly denied this explanation, instead trying to find other alternate explanations.
Really? I haven't heard anybody trying to deny anything. In fact, I adamantly believe there are probably human bones. Where am I going with this?
The desire there is to shy away from anything smacking of catastrophism, which an 18-inch thick layer of the size of the Ashley phosphate beds, composed of primarily bone, would indeed indicate a catastrophe of global proportions. And yet today, the beds are hardly mentioned in the scientific literature. Why is that?
Because what we can learn from it has basically been exhausted and there's very little more we can do with it other than mine it and use it.
Now, could it be because the evolutionary camp is avoiding the problems posed by the phosphate beds? Over the centuries, a wild variety of creatures have been found buried together pell-mell in this 18-inch thick layer. Whales, porpoises, fish, sharks, and ray sharks, including the gigantic shark Megalodon, toads, crocodiles, alligators, turtles.
Yes, all of those are in there, and they all date back to about 2.2 to 2.8 million years ago, and you will notice those are all aquatic animals.
Rabbits, monkeys, horses, tapirs, camels, elephants, rhinoceroses, mammoths and mastodons, sloths, muskrats, deer, pigs, dogs, sheep.
No, that's not entirely true. Those fossils were found on a higher level.
Hadrosaur dinosaurs, iguanodon dinosaurs.
No, that's a blatant lie. Well, from you, not from the book. In the book, the geologist took the fossil into a, quote, expert, unquote, and the expert said that it was a dinosaur, but that's not actually what it was.
What are commonly called marine dinosaurs, like the plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs.
Okay, so you're back to marine animals, and plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs are not dinosaurs, actually. But you're right, if you do dig far enough down, you will find them. You just have to dig a lot further down than you would for the whales and the megalodons.
And yes, human bones, teeth, and artifacts.
And again, back to the not entirely true. So what do I mean by this? I live in Kingston, Ontario, and here it's called the Limestone City. Soft rock made from dead animals is kind of my speciality. There's a limestone layer over top of the phosphate in the South Carolina area. And the limestone and the phosphate mixes in some places, usually in where there are rivers or there were rivers. Now in quarries, where they dig up the limestone, directly under the limestone you will find megalodon teeth, whale teeth, all sorts of things like that. But above that, you will find Ice Age creatures, like the mastodons and mammoths and the camels and things like that, along with humans. Yes, there were human beings in South Carolina during the Ice Age. This has been confirmed.
Now, while the biblical creationists have no qualms with the formation, evolutionary and deep time advocates struggle to produce a non-catastrophic explanation for the beds. How do you explain the mixture of deep water and shallow water organisms, land creatures from different environments, all buried together in the same layer.
Now, to a layman, it will look like because the phosphate layer and the limestone layer are so close to each other that they're basically the same thing, but they're not. Rock formation in that area seems to be very slow and gradual, and that's why it seems like there's so many similar creatures so close to each other, but you have to be very specific and very careful about how you study these layers because they're so close to each other, and because in water they will mix because they are soft rocks. It's really easy to go fossil hunting in South Carolina. You just have to go down a river or go into a quarry. You will find fossils everywhere, but you will never find a megalodon tooth on the same layer as a human bone. It just doesn't happen. Millions of years are separated by only inches. And the earliest geologists who studied these rocks in the 1800s did not realize the subtleties of these changes. And that's the reason we never talk about it, because we know now that these layers are very close to each other. Modern geologists and modern paleontologists are able to notice these subtleties and differences in the rock layers, and we know now that there are no megalodons on the same layer as humans. But in only 7 strokes of a shovel, you can probably find both.
The more recent papers on the phosphate beds make hardly any mention of bones. Any bones.
Well, you know that they mine the phosphate beds, right? It's used in industrial applications. So I would very strongly doubt that industrial papers will say anything about fossils. But you can go on YouTube, you can see them mining fossils in the phosphate beds. People still actively look for megalodon teeth and for Ice Age animals in those layers. Just for the hell of it, I'll put 2 links in the description of people looking for different fossils just in riverbeds and in quarries.
John Watson stated, and I'll echo here, there can only be one explanation: censorship. The scientific community has joined together in a conspiracy of silence in order to avoid the problem that the bones present to the modern day religion of evolutionism.
Man, you are fucking nuts. There's no conspiracy to hide this. It has been well established that there are fossils in South Carolina. You can't walk 2 feet down a riverbed without finding a tooth. They're everywhere. Nobody's hiding anything. The South Carolinian fossil beds are just not that interesting. And the main reason is because there's very little we can actually learn from them anymore. Mainly because they're mostly rock now, and it's soft rock, and soft rock is malleable over hundreds of years of time.
Does proper science hide the facts? Well, of course not. And it is for reasons such as this that I contend that evolutionism is not science.
Yes, evolutionism is not science, because evolutionism is not a scientific field. Evolutionism is a fucking philosophical view on reality. There is no scientific field called evolutionism.
So the point being, as I discussed on previous shows, is that there are lots of human fossils found all over the world. You just never hear about them.
Yes, and only the Christians are brave enough to share that information with us. God bless you. And I, for one, am satisfied that you have no bias in this discussion.
Remember those words of warning from our Creator, the Lord Jesus Christ, who said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but through me."
Yep, no bias at all. Thanks for watching my first official video for 2015. If you like what you saw, please subscribe, like my video, share with your friends. You can also follow me on Twitter, you can like my Facebook. You absolutely love me, you can support me on Patreon. And there's always more videos to come. Links to everything in the description.